The following program contains nudity and examples of censored material. Viewer discretion is advised.
I'm Jack Perkins, and this is Time Machine, with an issue just as important today as it was 100 years ago: censorship in the movies. Every day throughout our country, battle lines cross movie lines wherever controversial subjects are at odds with local attitudes. Now Congress, pressured by community outrage, is asked to decide how far is too far, how much is too much. Of course, what we remember is that this debate is as old as the art form. Its incredible history is what we call the Hollywood Censorship Wars.
Censorship is very risky business. However, I feel that the flip side of that very coin is what we're dealing with. We are not dealing with art for expression's sake.
The evidence is just overwhelming that entertainment violence that glorifies violence adds to violence in our society.
TV violence is just one small piece of a much larger picture.
We must self-regulate ourselves in a way that does not torment or torture the First Amendment in the slightest.
Seeing is believing. If y'all know all that y'all are doing in meeting and panels and they're getting together and making progress, they're working diligently, paying off. No, sirree. We've been hearing this for years.
What's next? There can't be any more. What more could be on the screen that has this? Is there anything else that we can show?
America, the year 1900, and these simple moving pictures were the rage. Yet this modern invention would soon revive old-fashioned taboos. Through the darkness and the light, some people saw their greatest fears.
Because the movies were such a popular entertainment, it was feared by the people who were making the decisions for the masses that if you showed them the wrong things, you would upset them or perhaps overthrow the whole country.
The movie makers, you know, they were not Tennessee Williams and Edward Albee exactly. Those movie makers were out to make a buck, and they knew that the button you push if you want to bring people into the Nickelodeon parlor is marked SEX.
There was enough to keep even the smallest of small-town censorship boards busy.
Most of the ideas of film censorship going back to 1907, then 1918, 1919, and even to the 1960s were really generally initiated by liberals in the city, a liberal commission wanting to protect things like civil rights and being afraid that the films were going to provoke people.
It would be impossible to satisfy all of these people, with the result that in any given year back in this period, you would have perhaps 8,000 edits made on a motion picture. The most famous, perhaps, was Griffith's Birth of a Nation.
The film was widely picketed, but we had a controversy now. We had one of the first major films in history. People wanted to see it, and in fact, the idea of the prior censorship, which was really revision, I think boosted attendance at the film when the film was finally released.
It was shown at the White House. President Wilson loved it. The Supreme Court saw it. They loved it. To this date, it is the largest grossing movie of all time. It has grossed $60 million in 1915 money. That would be equivalent today to probably $500 million. The Birth of a Nation remains, to date, the most censored film in history.
When the film was released, there was no national censorship board. Every community had its local censor. So it can be anybody from a church leader or a school teacher or administrator or politician. And each of these people had a whack at Birth of a Nation. Many of them, by the way, made cuts in the film that were never restored. So there is no true example of what the film is in its full length.
Thomas Edison entered the fray, targeting the censors with razor-sharp humor. Like other filmmakers, he was angry at the money lost every time prints were cut up and banned. Racism, birth control, white slavery. These were the broad issues, but censors soon had a specific target. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. Labor Day, 1921, a San Francisco hotel room. One of Hollywood's great comedians starred in a real-life drama, a scandal that shocked the industry.
It was in 1921 that there was the famous Fatty Arbuckle case, where a well-known film comedian had some kind of an encounter with a young girl, and she died, and it was kind of, in those days, full of purported sensuality, and the headlines screamed scandal in Hollywood.
The public was enraged at all of this. They viewed Hollywood as sort of a Gomorrah with modern furniture.
A scandal arose when, allegedly, he violated her using a Coke bottle. It was all done behind closed doors, and that's what the court had trouble determining. There were 3 trials. 2 of them ended in a hung jury, and 1 of them ended with his acquittal.
Though acquitted, Fatty Arbuckle's name was box office poison. Hollywood itself was tainted. Yet a solution was at hand.
Hollywood was beginning to look like a sin city, and for that reason the movie business and the movie moguls were extremely disturbed, fearful that there would be clamped down by government censorship and state censorship, which was beginning then.
And so the moguls decided to hire a commissioner of movies, except they called him president of the Motion Picture Producers Association. And he was brought on in 1922. His name was Will Hayes. He was Postmaster General in the cabinet of President Harding.
He was considered a nice guy, very boring, but most of all, he was a Christian. And that's just what the Jewish people who ran the Hollywood businesses in those days wanted. They wanted a front man, somebody who could go to the Congress, go to the people, and say, look, I'm not like these guys, and yet I've been hired, gee, sort of like a baseball commissioner, to come in and clean up the act.
In 1922, when Hayes came in as head of the motion picture industry, and the code of ethics, and a very severe code of ethics, was placed on the people who made motion pictures. The next year, motion pictures increased by 30% in attendance.
Savior or czar? Hayes' power over the movies left no mistake. Example, drug-addicted Paramount star Wallace Reed was committed to a sanitarium only weeks after shooting this film. Hayes publicly wished him well. Privately, he ordered all copies of Reed's new films destroyed, censored.
Will Hayes was first a very good friend of mine, a very nice man, a very common man. He liked to joke. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, but outside of that, I mean, he was very human, and he was dedicated to the industry, and I think did probably more good for the industry than anybody else that I can think of.
For the remainder of the 1920s, Will Hayes' iron fist ruled the industry, burying scandals and appeasing local censors. How did one man yield so much influence over ideas? He created a strict Bible with commandments that had to be followed. The power and glory of the Hayes Hollywood Production Code, when Time Machine continues. A&E's Time Machine returns to the Hollywood Censorship Wars. Black Tuesday, 1929, the stock market collapse took much of Hollywood with it. Would movie houses close their doors, as banks had? The picture was bleak. Banks backed the movies, and banks had shut down. So Will Hayes mounted a public relations campaign to sell entertainment in the face of adversity. He stepped in front of the cameras with a message for the masses.
You want entertainment, wholesome, interesting, and vital. This the motion picture industry is pledged to provide.
Will Hayes guaranteed the public would get entertainment, but producers countered that it was still going to take something extra to bring people who had little money to spend back to the theaters. It would take something racy, like Joan Crawford as a hooker.
Hello, lads. Boys, I want you to meet Thompson. Sadie, meet the boys. Boys.
But it didn't stop there.
Early sound films that upset people included using children in adult roles.
I think you're the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. You're gorgeous. You're ravishing. You're not a good woman. You're crazy. You've got to be good to get stuff like this and ain't hard times.
Cartoons that went and did things that cartoons weren't supposed to do. The most scandalous of those might have been Betty Boop, who in her early days really booped.
Put your buns below, but leave the damsel to me. Yes.
The censors in Hollywood let those scenes go. A year or two later, however, there was big money to be lost at the box office by these kind of objectionable scenes. Hollywood cleaned up its act for its middle-class audience.
Mr. Hayes, along with a Catholic priest named Father Lord, Daniel Lord, I believe was his name, devised what came to be known as the Hayes Production Code, which was a catalog of do's and don'ts.
The code sets up high standards of performance for motion picture producers. It states the considerations which good taste and community value make necessary in this universal form of entertainment. Respect for law, respect for every religion, respect for every race, and respect for every nation.
Obviously, Will Hayes personally did not look at all these movies any more than I do in the rating system that we now have. So he brought in a man named Joe Breen, a flamboyant Irishman who was sort of the chairman of the production code, and he and his staff literally saw every movie and determined whether or not it was going to warrant the seal of approval.
All the motion picture production companies in the United States have joined hands in adopting what has come to be known as a production code of ethics. Its broad general purpose is to ensure screen entertainment which will be reasonably acceptable to our patrons everywhere. Entertainment which is definitely free from offense.
He produced a code which, believe me, I as a story editor had to try to adhere to, and it was torture at times. We did ridiculous things.
A man could kiss a woman for 5 seconds.
Nobody used any swear words in films.
Oh, God damn it! I'll be goddamn! God damn it! God damn it!
Another one which I particularly enjoyed was if two people, man and woman, in bed, even though they're married, each of them has to have one foot on the floor if there's any lovemaking, which, of course, unless the woman was Nadia Comaneci, some world-class gymnast, nothing much was going to happen.
We must be on the lookout for scenes or action or dialogue which are likely to give offense. The responsible men in this industry want no such pictures and will not allow these to be shown.
The result was obvious. Dozens of pre-code films could no longer be distributed. Even cartoon stars like Betty Boop had to cover up. Everyone was in the hot seat, including comedian W.C. Fields. This film, made prior to the 1934 code, had to be recut before it could be released. This is how it looked after passing the Breen office. This is how it looked before.
This won't hurt you much.
A new chapter. The censorship wars turned into the holy wars. Raunchy was pushed to extremes by one very famous woman, Mae West.
Hello, folks. We're up here at Mr. Grauman's beautiful theater to see the grand opening of premiere of my new picture, I'm No Angel. Of course, I didn't call it I'm No Angel for nothing.
Mae West did three things. She entertained people, she saved Paramount Pictures, and she single-handedly created the Legion of Decency, which was single-handedly created to fight Mae West.
Oh, Mr. Clayton, I was thinking over everything you said, and I made my decision.
Good. I'm glad you made up your mind so quickly.
Oh, very quick in a slow way. You see, I can't discuss it over the phone. It's got a lot of angles to it. You better come up and see me.
Well, I'll be glad to. In fact, I'll come over right away if it's convenient for you.
Most convenient. I'll tell you this much. You're going to like what I got in mind. Mm-hmm. I'll be ready. Goodbye.
She was the original advocate of sexual freedom, especially women's sexual freedom. And so naturally she was a target.
You know, I like to get around and travel, and believe me, I've been places and seen things.
Mm-hmm. I've been things and seen places. That sort of evens us up, huh? Sit down.
The one thing a producer did not want to do is get one-fifth of the American public on his back, and they knew they could expect that if the movies got too raunchy in one way or the other.
The vulgar, the cheap, and the tawdry is out. There is no room on the screen at any time for pictures which offend against common decency, and these the industry will not allow.
The Breen office would face an equally difficult, if not its most notorious challenge with the production of one of the greatest movies of all time.
remember when Clark Gable used the word damn in a film for the first time in Gone with the Wind, and how it caused a furor.
Well, if you can imagine all the trouble that Clark had, Gable had, in saying, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
We had a meeting. I was one of them on the meeting, and we decided that there was just no other word that could do the job that damn could in that situation, so we let the damn stay in.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
The production code. It worked usually, but was it the answer for a democracy? With ticket sales in mind, Hollywood mavericks said no, as we'll see when Time Machine returns. A&E's Time Machine returns to the Hollywood Censorship Wars. The Hollywood Production Code. In many ways, it was the moral arm of the major studios, MGM, Warner Brothers, Paramount, Fox. But while the moguls generally obeyed the censors, Hollywood had a group of renegades who disobeyed. They existed in a low-budget world, in theaters well off the beaten path.
Sex Madness takes you behind the scenes, where you will learn the story of young and innocent Millicent as she finds herself fallen in with bad company.
What is he looking for? We're looking for a guy that's been peddling dope to school kids.
I'm going to take you on a sleigh ride with some snowbirds.
Sleigh ride? Snowbirds? In summer?
Gosh, you are tough.
Yes, Frank. Sleigh ride. Snowbird. This is the gutter slang of the cocaine fiend. See this important film now, before it is too late.
Early in my career, I met a couple of the roadshow producers who were more or less towards the end of their career. And these guys were great. They really were. They were con men, but in such an amiable, friendly way.
Say, I know a fella that could put you in a show right away. In this film, you will meet Jane Bradford. Matter, got a headache? She's a young and innocent cocktail waitress. Jane Bradford is about to lose that innocence. I got the grandest headache medicine in the world. Yes, Jane. Headache medicine.
Why, that's marvelous. I feel better already.
I remember one of them had nurses at the theaters in order to help anybody who became frightened from a horror film. Another one of them had sex therapists. He was pitching a sex film, and the sex therapist, of course, was just his staff.
You will see youngsters caught up in a hotbed of sex.
They have the cutest.
I said, well, what did these people do when they came out and talked to your secretary, who was supposed to be Dr. So-and-so, the sex therapist? He said, I maintain that we did these people good. They didn't know anything about sex at all, and we were explaining it to them. We helped them. We did a service to the community.
You will see it all in this no-holds-barred film expose. Lust.
Man, oh man, she got it. Boy, oh boy, look at that baby.
Debauchery.
You can phone home and you're staying with friends.
Sex Madness. Coming soon to this theater.
Sex, drugs, exploitation was the name of the game. And like snake oil salesmen, the trick for these producers was to get in and out of town quickly.
I believe they avoided the censors by the fact that they were so small, the censors paid little attention. They played to a large extent in small towns, and they'd be in with a lot of advertising for 1 week and out of that town and move on to the next town before the censors were really particularly aware that such a thing was happening.
Inevitably, the biggest showdown would be played out in Hollywood. It involved an outlaw and a man who thought he could beat the system.
Now, Howard Hughes gives you The Outlaw. Savage love. Primitive emotion.
The only films I knew about that were condemned in my time was The Outlaw.
Jane Russell and The Outlaw collided with Joe Breen's moral boundaries.
The start of production was held up while the amount of cleavage of Jane Russell's rather ample bosom was determined, how much could be shown and what would go too far.
Well, Howard Hughes seemed to understand that if he picked a fight with the Breen office and about censorship, he'd get a lot of publicity.
The furor over The Outlaw centered around the advertising as much as what was in the movie itself. The advertising was provocative, purposely so. After all, the movie was produced by Howard Hughes. Hughes found Jane Russell in a Hollywood dentist's office. He did not want her for her secretarial abilities.
You didn't?
You see anything of Doc and the sheriff?
Here we are, Billy, right behind you. And put those hands where they belong.
He's very innocent. I don't think it was a sex exploitation or at all. Not then.
Are you Doc's girl?
There was cleavage in it. And of course, in those days, you didn't show any cleavage at all. I remember the shot they got, as a matter of fact, and it was not even supposed to be in there because it was an accident. And I leaned over to pull the covers up, and they got too much cleavage.
The fight was far from over. As The Outlaw moved into theaters, local censors took aim. Top Gun was a man from Memphis, a legend among censors, Lloyd T. Binford.
He was a censor, and he censored film for the particular area in the Memphis area where the pictures run.
Marina, what were his last words before they hanged him?
He said, brother, there's certainly going to be a lesson to me.
On the Our Gang comedies in The Little Rascals, the part where Farina was in the classrooms with the other children, this was taken out. And Mr. Benford stated that this was not the way that people lived in this area. And any of the black people would be, if they stayed in their place, in other words, like chauffeurs or maids or mechanics, if that was way of normal life in this area where he was censoring for, then that's the way he made his judgment.
Binford, like most other small-town censors, projected his own morals on the movies. He saw to it that films like Curly had no place in Memphis, Tennessee. The power of the local censors was astounding. If they didn't like a scene in a movie for any moral, religious, social, or even racial reason, they could ban it. So in effect, the Hollywood Censorship Wars had as many battlefields as there were communities across the country. But the warring camps would soon join forces to fight an outside enemy when Time Machine continues. Andy's Time Machine returns to the Hollywood Censorship Wars. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor attacked. America at war. Censors put on uniforms and marched in with new orders.
When some cameramen took some films of of the fleet at Pearl Harbor being bombed by the Japanese, that film was suppressed for, 16 months because they didn't want to disturb the morale, and it would have been damaging and disturbing of the American public.
John Huston, who was an award-winning filmmaker, was allowed into the military and asked to produce films for the Office of War Information and the Signal Corps. Two of his films that were heavily censored were The Battle of San Pietro, in which he actually had newsreel shots of American soldiers dying. Those shots were taken out and not restored until years later.
The Pentagon dictated what the rules would be for soldiers and censors alike. Hollywood's orders were completely clear. Nothing could compromise America's war effort, not even a cartoon.
Boy, oh boy! We caught them with their pants down.
We made the film in complete innocence, but we had revealed a national secret, apparently, without knowing it. I don't know where the film is, probably destroyed.
In reality, the threat of the bomb gave censors more ammunition. As we went from post-war to Cold War, there was a new target in their sights.
I want to emphasize at the outset of these hearings that the fact that the Committee on Un-American Activities is investigating alleged communist influence and infiltration in the moving picture industry must not be considered or interpreted as an attack on the industry itself.
The greatest concern the film industry had was censorship, that there would be, as a result of that, some attempt to control the content of films.
There was a lot of pressure in Hollywood at the time to stop the hearings, not to cooperate with the hearings, that the hearings were investigating Hollywood willy-nilly for no reason whatsoever, that there was no communist influence, and that this was a witch hunt.
And the fear of censorship from outside and from the governing body of the land, from Congress, is what really alerted and concerned all of us.
George Murphy, Ronald Reagan, and Robert Montgomery are among the top-flight movie actors testifying before the House Un-American Activities Committee in Washington.
Immediately following the hearings in 1947, there was a meeting of the producers in New York, which produced something called the Waldorf Agreement.
They were going to react to the actions that the House Un-American Activities Committee had taken the previous month, asking people to name names and looking for communist influence in the movies. In fact, what came out of the Waldorf Conference was the blacklist.
We will forthwith discharge or suspend without compensation those in our employ, and we will not re-employ any of the 10 until such time as he is acquitted or has purged himself of contempt and declares under oath that he is not a communist.
All 10 of them were good friends of mine. I wasn't going to be too far behind. It wasn't until the 10 came out of jail in the spring of '51 that the committee struck at Hollywood again, and I was among the first to be called at that time, and I distinguished sometimes between the Hollywood 10 and the Hollywood hundreds, and it really became hundreds of people who were blacklisted.
Calling the House Un-American Activities Committee to order, Chairman J. Parnell Thomas of New Jersey opens an inquiry into possible communist penetration of the Hollywood film industry. The committee is seeking to determine if Red Party members have reached the screen with subversive propaganda.
I think Hollywood felt if there is going to be control over content of films, we'll control it. Nobody's going to tell us how to do it or to what extent. And yet the really ironic thing is that in protesting against possible censorship from the government, the whole industry wound up censoring who could work and who could not.
We were given instructions to, when we were going to hire an actor or an actress, that we call a blind number, da-da-da-da-da, and say John Smith, and the blind numbers person would say no. Boom, and we couldn't hire them.
The censoring of ideas and the blacklisting of people, two weapons born out of congressional hearings. Branded as communists, banned from making other people's movies, a number of blacklist victims joined forces to produce a statement about the times, the politics, and the people.
Salt of the Earth was a fairly left-leaning drama about farmers and organizing them into a labor movement. That, of course, was the last thing that Hollywood wanted to see. And in fact, even some of the labor unions in Hollywood opposed the production of Salt of the Earth.
We found a subject in a strike that had taken place in New Mexico of Mexican-American miners, in which the company had gotten an injunction and the strike seemed lost. And the wives of the strikers said, the injunction says that striking miners may not picket. We will take over your picket line.
It was impossible for the writer, director, and producer to get a crew that they wanted. It was impossible for them to get financing. And many of the actors who appeared in the film were later threatened or blacklisted simply because they had mouthed lines that someone else had written.
Why are you standing there? Do something.
Relax.
But women are getting hurt. We've got to take over.
They're doing all right.
Anyway, looks like you got your hands full.
The blacklist, the very name speaks of an age when reason gave way to fear. As its impact faded, so did the impact of the production code. But by no means were the censorship wars over. The biggest battles were still ahead at the Supreme Court, and now within the court of public opinion. The latest volleys when Time Machine returns. Our attitudes, our very beliefs, they contributed to the formulation of the production code. Ironically, in time, they also helped end it. It started with a miracle.
In the miracle, you have the seduction of a young woman by a man presuming himself to be the Lord. And this combines all of the objections to blasphemy, sexuality, violence that you can name.
Lo sapete? Io ho visto San Giuseppe. Proprio mo a capo.
With all the sex and violence, one of the things that was overlooked in treatment of subject on the screen was religion. Rossellini's The Miracle opened that door and practically closed it. The film was brought up on the First Amendment rights, and the First Amendment was finally, after decades, applied to film. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, both of them came together with The Miracle.
The Miracle decision tried to define pornography, and I guess best summed up by the famous aphorism of the late Justice Potter Stewart when he said, "I can't define pornography, but I know what it is when I see it."
A major barrier was broken. For the first time, movies were protected by the First Amendment. With the Miracle decision came a new age of filmmaking. Controversial, gritty, realistic. Censors could complain. They'd still try to enforce the code, but in fact, it was crumbling under the weight of such films as The Man with the Golden Arm.
$5.
When taboos were being shattered in the 1950s, the one that did it for drugs was Man with the Golden Arm. Before then, you couldn't even mention drugs, even if you were doing so in a negative way. When Otto Preminger made Man with the Golden Arm, it did it all.
The monkey never dies. When you kick him off, he just hides in a corner waiting his turn.
Suddenly, the door was open to virtually every subject. And not surprisingly, sex found its place back on the screen.
Hello, Tony, darling.
Hi, Auntie. You getting up or going to bed?
How did it go at school today?
Just like Mae West, Mamie Van Doren flaunted her sex. Perhaps not with as much comedic skill, but certainly with as much charm.
Stop treating me like a stranger. Vic out of town, it's lonely. Relatives should always kiss each other hello and goodbye, polite like.
You're getting paid for my room and board.
But not enough.
Women were not allowed to show any cleavage, so what they did is they padded their bras at the wardrobe department. And I had one, I called it the bullet bra. And we passed it around to everyone. Everybody would grab this one bra because they were like pyramids, you know, they whoop. And the bigger, the better. And the Breen office couldn't come over and feel them, you know, to see if they're real, or they couldn't tell you how big you could make your breasts, you know.
Don't tell me you never rode a hot rod or had a late date in the second balcony.
The old production code was indeed falling apart. An anachronism with little meaning, given the changes society was experiencing in the 60s.
The code opened up, I think, as part of the opening up of the whole culture. It was the day of the counterculture, of the protesting of the Vietnam War, of a more free and open look at sex. And I think the motion picture makers wanted to reflect what was going on in the world around them, and the code trying to impose ideas left over from the 30s that had been modified slightly in the 40s and 50s just fell out of it.
I invented what I think is the only sane way to deal with an unruly marketplace, and that is to give advance cautionary warnings to parents and let parents make their own judgments about the movies they choose their children to see.
G, all ages admitted, general audiences. GP, all ages admitted, parental guidance suggested. R, restricted, under 17 requires accompanying parent or adult guardian. X, no one under 18 admitted.
The current rating system has helped defuse the censorship battles, but not eliminate them entirely. Effective protests have echoed from the pulpits, targeting movies that have been out of step with church doctrine or community morality.
The time when Hollywood can ridicule our faith and our values, and now even our God, is over.
Amen. Now there's a new hot button, violence. The battlefield is television. The arena is Congress.
There is no question in my mind that, you know, a displaying of violence on TV to children of impressionable age, can be pretty devastating.
A good part of what has gone wrong in this country is due to our mass media.
In only a half a century, television violence has become a central theme to the life of our young people, as central as homework and playgrounds.
In terms of entertainment violence, the evidence is just overwhelming. That is causing harm in our society. There are a lot of people in the industry who won't acknowledge that.
Is censorship at the doorstep again?
My answer to that is I don't want to control it. I don't want the federal government to control content. But what I do want to do is to put some pressure on the industry so that they will regulate themselves in an area where clearly harm is being done to our society.
We must self-regulate ourselves in a way that does not torment or torture the First Amendment in the slightest.
Do we say to the networks, you can't broadcast anything that is violent? Do we say to the screenwriters, you can't write anything that's violent? Do we say to the filmmakers, you can't make it? Do we say to the cable networks, you can't transmit it? Do we say to the advertisers, you can't support it? Or do we say to the public, no longer can you watch it?
So many questions. The fact is, we may not like the answer when we find it.
If immediate voluntary steps are not taken and deadlines established, government should respond and respond immediately. Government immediately. Government immediately. Government immediately.
Is history repeating itself? With the threat of congressional action, Hollywood seems to be choosing self-regulation once again. We hear promises of less violence. We're told filmmakers will try to avoid behaviors that can be easily imitated. We're assured, especially by the television networks, that adult themes will be clearly identified. But then, as one congressman stated, we've heard it all before. Next week at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Bill Curtis will be presenting a special investigative reports. Join Bill for an in-depth study of the LA riots when Investigative Reports presents Anatomy of a Riot. And I invite you to join me on January 21st when Time Machine returns with Modern Marvels, the Empire State Building. Until then, I'm Jack Perkins. Thanks for watching.
Today, the screen presents pictures that walk and talk and act and sing. There is color to give them vividness and life. There is widescreen projection just out of the laboratory to bring you the spectacles of nature and art in their true majesty. There is the promise, too, of three-dimension projection to give lifelike perspective. That is the march of an industry from a novelty to the greatest democracy of entertainment in the history of the world. And this is the art, too, that the production code adopted by the motion picture industry is designed to develop and to protect.